Ok. Bonjour tout le monde. Je suis ravie d'accueillir aujourd'hui, pour la première fois en 2026, en Commission des affaires économiques et monétaires, la présidente de la Banque centrale européenne, Madame Christine Lagarde. Nous avons le plaisir de nous revoir après votre présence en plénière en début février à l'occasion du débat et de l'adoption du rapport annuel d'initiative sur le Parlement européen, sur les activités de la Banque centrale européenne, un rapport qui a donné lieu d'ailleurs au vote d'amendements très largement en faveur et en soutien à l'euro digital. Les dialogues monétaires, comme celui d'aujourd'hui, sont essentiels, comme vous le savez, pour l'exercice du contrôle démocratique du Parlement européen sur la Banque centrale européenne. Et je suis ravie de la bonne coopération que nous avons jusqu'à présent et qui ne cesse de s'améliorer avec la Banque centrale européenne. Let's return to English now with some element on the content of today's monetary dialogue, during which we will mainly discuss two topics. First, the quarterly assessment of the ECB's monetary policy stance. Second, the inflation gap, divergences between actual and perceived inflation and possible policy implication. First, on monetary policy. Since our last monetary dialogue in December last year, headline inflation in the euro area has edged down to 1.7% below the ECB's inflation target of 2%. In this context, on February 5th, the ECB Governing Council decided to keep the three key interest rates unchanged at 2% for the fifth consecutive time. Second, on the inflation gap, keeping inflation low, stable, and predictable is key for macroeconomic and financial stability. However, the latest ECB Consumer Expectation Survey show that there is a considerable gap, an important gap between actual inflation and perceived inflation. The median rate of perceived inflation by citizens is at 3.2%, more than 1% percentage point higher than actual inflation, as it may have significant economic implication. A clearer understanding of this matter is very important for the conduct of monetary policy. As usual, all briefing papers prepared by the Parliament panel of experts on these two topics in view of this monetary dialogue are available on the Econ Committee website. Regarding the choreography and the procedure, Christine Lagarde will have 10 minutes for an opening statement, and then there will be, of course, this Q&A session with the Econ members, 1 minute and a half for the question, 3 minutes for the answer for the first round, and then a second round, and if we have the time, catch the eyes. President Lagarde, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, President Laluc, and good morning to all of you, and thank you for being in attendance for this session. Let me also indicate how much a pleasure and a privilege it is to come before you and to participate in this dialogue that you have just praised. I would also like to thank you for the support that you have given to our annual report and to the amendments that were proposed for their very significant support. That means a lot to us, and it comforts us in the determination that we have. Because we have done that a couple of days ago at the ECB, I would like to reiterate the solemn reminder that this week marks 4 years since Russia launched its unjustified aggression against Ukraine. Our thoughts are with the Ukrainian people who continue to endure immense suffering, and we stand in full solidarity with all those affected by this war. At the ECB 2 days ago, we had a special celebration in respect of what is happening and the suffering that is imposed on particularly the civil population. So turning back to the topics of the day, the euro area has faced an exceptionally challenging environment over recent years, with high inflation affecting both households and firms. We can now see, however, that our efforts to bring inflation down have been effective. Inflation has fallen markedly from its peak at 10.6% in October 22. It fluctuated in a narrow range around 2% in the second half of last year and stood on the last reading at 1.7% in January. the ECB's decisive monetary policy response played a crucial role in bringing inflation back to target. However, even though inflation has declined, surveys show that many citizens still perceive prices to be rising faster than the official data suggest. This gap between measured and perceived inflation that you have alluded to, President, is not merely a statistical curiosity. It is a historical and global regularity. And it has implications for economic decisions and for trust in the institutions, trust that helps anchor inflation expectations. So today's discussion that you have selected as a topic is very timely and relevant. But before turning to inflation perceptions, I would like to start by outlining our assessment of the euro area economy and our monetary policy stance. So, our economy is estimated to have grown by 0.3% in the fourth quarter of last year and by 1.5% for 2025 as a whole. I think you have received, and it's being circulated at the moment, a recto verso one-pager which indicates a number of the comments that I will make on the state of our economy. So growth in the fourth quarter was primarily driven by domestic demand, with services activity, especially in the information and communication sector, playing a key role. Manufacturing has been weaker, but overall still resilient to the impact of higher tariff and geopolitical uncertainty, while the construction sector, is gradually gaining momentum. What is interesting is that external activities, export, import, are actually having a negative impact on our growth. So it's predominantly domestic investment and consumption. So in the period ahead, activity is expected to be supported by a rising labour income amid a resilient labour market, as well as investment in defence, in infrastructure, and in digital technologies, both from the public and the private sector. At the same time, the trade environment remains challenging, owing to higher tariffs, a stronger euro, and a persistently volatile global environment, adding to the uncertainty that we have experienced. Inflation declined to 1.7% in January, as I have mentioned, from 2% in December, owing to lower energy and services inflation. Again, you have a chart in the paper that has been circulated. Core inflation, which excludes energy and food, eased to 2.2% after 2.3% in December. Now, with inflation lower than nominal wage growth, real wages that are adjusted for inflation, have not only recovered, but have on average risen above levels seen back in 2019. Again, you have a chart detailing this. Wage growth remains elevated, but has eased gradually and is expected to continue to moderate to around 3% in the medium term. We continue to expect inflation to stabilize at our 2% medium-term target. As a result, we decided to keep the 3 key ECB interest rates unchanged at our monetary policy meeting earlier this month. Now, looking ahead, we will continue to follow a data-dependent and meeting-by-meeting approach to determining the appropriate monetary policy stance. In particular, our interest rate decisions will be based on our assessment of the inflation outlook and the risks surrounding it. That's a new development since our assessment of our strategy, in light of the incoming economic and financial data, as well as the dynamics of underlying inflation and the strength of monetary policy transmission. And we are not pre-committing to any predetermined path. So let me now turn to your chosen topic, which is this divergence between actual and perceived inflation and why it matters for our mandate. Inflation perceptions describe people's beliefs about recent price changes. And while these perceptions tend to move with measured inflation, they are typically higher. And this is not a phenomenon that is specific to the euro area. It's a global phenomenon that is observed around the world. Since the launch of our ECB Consumer Expectation Survey, we started that in April 2020, perceived inflation in the euro area has, on average, exceeded measured inflation by 1.2%. Inflation perceptions increased in 2021 and 2022 in line with measured inflation, and have since declined substantially in line with inflation. So why does inflation perception matter? 3 reasons. First, perceptions directly influence economic behavior. When people believe prices are rising faster, they may adjust their consumption and their saving decisions, as well as their wage demand. This, in turn, can affect aggregate economic activity and inflation dynamics. Second, perceptions of current inflation shape expectations about future inflation. We monitor these expectations closely for any signs of a sustained deviation from our 2% medium-term target. Third, as I mentioned in my introduction, inflation perceptions can influence public trust in institutions, including the ECB. And as we know, trust is a valuable good in its own right, but it also helps to anchor inflation expectations. So why is it that perceptions always exceed measured inflation? I think a useful starting point is that there is no single perception of inflation. Survey responses are shaped by personal experience. While the questions typically refer to changes in the general level of consumer prices, each individual interprets them through the lens of his or her own consumption patterns and experiences. And that is why perception of inflation differ across demographic groups. What people buy and how they often buy certain goods or certain services, you can think of food or petrol, for instance, actually matters. Price developments in frequently purchased items tend to weigh more heavily on perception than broader movement in the overall consumption basket. Food is a case in point, and food inflation has been above HICP inflation since 2022, still is. Looking forward, we expect it to continue to decline and stabilize somewhat above 2% as of late 2026. I'm talking about food here. Psychology adds another layer. People tend to focus more on price increases rather than price decreases of equal size, which lead to an upward bias in their perceptions of inflation. These everyday experiences are further shaped by the wider economic environment. The recent inflation surge heightened uncertainty, particularly in relation to geopolitics and trade policy, and sustained media attention can all amplify people's experience of inflation. Finally, financial literacy matters. People with greater financial knowledge tend to report perceptions that are closer to measured inflation rates. And this raises an important question. What can policymakers do to bring perceived inflation closer into line with actual inflation? First and foremost, we must continue to deliver on our primary objective, ensuring that inflation stabilizes at our symmetric 2% target over the medium term. Do it and communicate about it so that it is understood. Effective communication is important. Following up on our 2021 strategy review, we have worked hard to make our communication more accessible to the wider public. For example, we have sought to explain our policies in as simple terms as possible, and we have increased our presence on all digital platforms. Third, Europe should invest in financial education to raise financial literacy levels. While there have been encouraging improvements in recent years, financial literacy in Europe is still lagging behind that of other jurisdictions. At the ECB, we are taking active steps to communicate in a more accessible manner, for example, by offering explainers on YouTube, through our Espresso Economics channel. Yes, the ECB has a channel on YouTube, Espresso Economics. These actions are one element within a wider effort among national central banks to improve financial literacy across Europe. And I welcome the initiative on financial literacy within the Saving and Investment Union agenda. Improving people's understanding of economic and financial concepts will not only bring perceived inflation closer to measured inflation, but it will also allow them to make informed financial choices, strengthening resilience in the face of future economic shocks. So in conclusion, we pay close attention to households' inflation perceptions, not only because these have an impact on economic activity and expectations, but also to ensure that we continue to earn the trust of the people we serve. But strengthening individuals' trust is a shared task. Your role is to channel their concerns and act as a bridge between the ECB and the people we serve. Our role is to focus on delivering our mandate and explain not only what we do, but also why and how we do it, and to do so in a way that can be easily understood. So I hope we can continue working together to understand exactly what the expectations are and to assuage the concerns when they're not relevant and to try to reduce this gap between perceived inflation and actually measured inflation. I very much look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, President Lagarde. Let's turn now to the Q&A session. 1 minute and a half for the questions, 3 minutes for the answer, and you have the possibility to have a follow-up of 1 minute for the answer and 2 minutes. 1 minute for the question and 2 minutes for the answer. For EPP, Markus Ferber.
Ja, vielen Dank, Frau Präsidentin. Herzlich willkommen wieder im
Just
Ausschuss.
wait a second. Thank you.
Yeah, I made only some blah blah that you have time. So, herzlich willkommen, Frau Präsidentin. Schön, dass Sie wieder da sind. Ich habe 2 Fragen, die sich auch um das Thema Inflation drehen, wo Sie jetzt noch nichts dazu gesagt haben. Das eine ist, dass wir schon im letzten Jahr beginnend eine Dollarschwäche spüren, auch mit Signalen aus den USA, dass ein Interesse da ist, dass der Dollar im Verhältnis zu anderen Währungen schwächer sein soll. Das heißt für uns natürlich, dass wir Aufwertungstendenzen haben und insbesondere in den Bereichen, wo global noch in Dollar gehandelt wird, bedeutet das ja, dass wir uns zusätzliche Inflation in die Eurozone holen können. Wie bewerten Sie die aktuelle Dollarschwäche in Ihrer Inflationsanalyse? Und das zweite Thema kommt auch aus den USA, nämlich der richtige Umgang mit künstlicher Intelligenz. In den USA wird gerade sehr prominent von jemandem, der in Zukunft ja auch Verantwortung für Geldstabilität übernehmen soll, die These vertreten, künstliche Intelligenz könne die Produktivität so stark erhöhen, dass der Inflationsdruck strukturell sinken würde und niedrigere Leitzinsen ermöglicht werden würden. Sehen Sie hier ähnliche Tendenzen in Ihren Prognosen bei der Europäischen Zentralbank oder wie bewerten Sie das Potenzial der künstlichen Intelligenz, nicht nur was Produktivitätswachstum betrifft, sondern was auch Inflationserwartung betrifft? Vielen Dank.
Thank you very much for your 2 questions. So on the first one, concerning the exchange rate. First of all, we monitor exchange rates. We do not set targets, and we measure it to the extent that it impacts our inflation outlook. And yes, there has been a depreciation of the US dollar, whether it's a determined policy by the US authorities or whether it's a reflection of the fundamentals, the lack of certainty, the view that investors have about the currency is something that, will be determined in due course. Not for us to do that, but there has been an appreciation of the US currency, which, again, we monitor to see how it impacts our objective of price stability. To the extent that it has an impact on inflation, obviously, we factor that into our projections, and we give our projections on the basis of all factors, including the assessment we have, based on several factors, including market intelligence, as to where we anticipate that currency to go. But don't forget that when we establish our projection, we set not a deadline, but we set a date at which we just stop the clock, because otherwise we would have sort of constantly changing projections. We will have projections coming out for the next monetary policy meeting around the 17th and 18th of March, and what we will then produce will be based on exchange rate as at a certain point in time. But we do look very carefully at those movements. On AI, it is a multifaceted issue, because on the one hand, it has already been a massive investment wave in the United States, but not only in the United States. We are seeing significant investment in Europe as well for the diffusion of artificial intelligence in multiple sectors of the economy. So there is a lot of financing that goes into artificial intelligence, both in terms of production, predominantly in the US, and possibly in China as well, although we don't have the same degree of data as far as China is concerned, and in Europe for the diffusion of artificial intelligence. Now, what impact it will have on productivity, we are beginning to see some results and some data that we can identify, and what we are seeing for the moment is that it's increasing productivity. And on this front, Europe is not lagging behind. Europe is equally moving and equally benefiting from those productivity increase, including in the SME sector. That's what our data and our surveys are telling us. What we don't know yet, and which we're looking at very carefully, is the impact that it will have on the labour market. The literature at the moment tells us that the mass of investment is leading to some productivity improvement, but we are not yet seeing consequences in terms of labour market and waves of redundancies that are feared, and that we will be extremely attentive going forward. Thank you.
Follow-up?
Ja, vielen Dank. Ich habe noch ein Thema, was uns eher intern betrifft. Normalerweise läuft ja der Weg, Sie setzen Leitzinsen fest, das wirkt sich auf die Kreditzinsen der Banken aus und daraus folgen dann Kreditangebot und Nachfrage in der realen Wirtschaft. Wenn wir jedoch verstärkt Private Credit Funds und andere Nichtbanken haben, die in der Kreditvergabe tätig sind, dann funktioniert dieser Transmissionsmechanismus ja nicht mehr so selbstverständlich. Haben Sie da Analysen innerhalb der EZB, welche Auswirkungen diese Private Credit Anteile an den geldpolitischen Entscheidungen hat und welche Konsequenzen ziehen Sie daraus?
Well, thank you for your question on private credit and the phenomenon of private credit, because it is increasing. It has doubled since 2009. It represents roughly 30% of the financing of non-financial corporate sector, so it matters. And we are looking at it from two angles. Number one, to make sure that our monetary policy is transmitted. What we're seeing for the moment is an unimpaired monetary policy transmission, but we are very attentive to it. And we have observed, in particular in relation to lending to the corporate sector, a slight increase since November. So we are looking at that very carefully. I think the second aspect that we have to be attentive to, but it is more in the remit of the SSM, is the link between the banking sector and the private credit. And in that respect, I think that the level and the granularity of data that we have available is not as optimal as we would like it. So I'm sure that the SSM, within its prerogatives, and the ESRB, for instance, which I have the privilege to chair as well, will be making some recommendations and guidance in that respect.
Thank you. For the SND, Nikos Papandreou.
Bienvenue. Welcome, Ms. Lagarde. Good to see you again in our group here. I'm going to get away a little bit from economics, but close to it. We're living in a moment of the assumptions that we've had about economic policy making are being challenged. Globalization is fragmenting. Capitalism is under pressure from inequality, climate risk, geopolitical conflict, economic shocks originate outside traditional economic sphere. Even Marcus Ferber's good question about AI is something that we would not have to talk about 5 years ago. It's new things that we have to deal with all the time that we're completely learning at this point. And as president of ECB, you have to take all of these things into account. Technical, systemic, geopolitical, tariffs, what Trump will do the next day, what happens in Venezuela. So given that I'm not sure how many more times we'll have you here in front of us, given your recent statements that you'll leave earlier than expected, I'd like that, what kind of worldview, or the Weltanschauung, as they say on my left here, or the cosmotheory, as they say in Greek, guide your own critical thinking about capitalism? And how do you translate the broader understanding of today's unstable global order into monetary policy choices that preserve credibility, stability, and trust in the euro? You can do a whole class on philosophy on this one. Thank you.
I was going to ask you, how much time do we have? I have plenty of time, by the way. I mean, you raise a very deep question. Let me start with two things. One is level of uncertainty. It has definitely risen. Speed at which it moves, velocity of uncertainty, and the factors that are behind it. You rightly said that 5 years ago we would not have talked about artificial intelligence. Actually, not even 3 years ago, because ChatGPT came about, or whatever. I don't want to promote anyone. But these things came out 3 years ago. And the speed at which they replace each other, the speed at which they update is something that I don't think that we have seen before. So it's a combination of uncertainty, shock to the economy, transformative factor, for good or for bad, at a speed which is just incredible. So for the legislators, for the policymakers, for us to adjust to that and to appreciate the changes that will result from this accelerated pace is in my humble view, new. And as a result of that, we need to adjust. So in response, what can we do? First of all, I think that the monetary policy stance that we have adopted is perfectly legitimate and adequate for the state of affairs that we're dealing with. When we are deciding meeting by meeting, when we say that we are data dependent and not data point dependent, and when we say that there is no preset pace for our policy, I think it's perfectly legitimized by the current situation. Now, some people argue that we have too many data, we should stop this data dependency. I'm sorry, but I'm really convinced that that's what we should be really focusing on. Now, that doesn't stop us from also bringing an element of judgment in the work that we do. Because as you rightly said, there are factors which we would not have predicted 3 years ago, and there are developments that we can anticipate, but we have no certainty about. So in terms of the work that we do, we try to respond to that by using scenario analysis, what if, and then we roll out and use our model and our tools in order to respond and try to have ranges and probabilities of occurrences. We also use sensitivity analysis. Other examples, when we have future prices that are available on oil and gas, for instance. Now, we cannot take all that, for totally granted, totally rooted and cast in stone, because that changes as well. But we try to have as broad a spectrum as possible of what will actually inform the decisions that we make. This is really the work that we have been doing, that we will continue to do in the future. And when we say that we are in a good place, but agile, that's really what we mean. We have to be attentive to all these developments, their consequences, and the monitoring that we can do of it. Thank you.
Thank you. For Gilles Boyer, Renew. For Renew, Gilles Boyer.
Oui, it's the same, Chair. Thank you. Merci. Merci, Madame la Présidente, d'être avec nous à nouveau. Nous apprécions toujours ces échanges et au risque de vous surprendre et de vous ramener sur un dossier plus terre à terre, je vais vous parler de l'euro numérique, qui est un dossier absolument emblématique, qui prend une nécessité absolue eu égard aux contexte géopolitique auquel nous faisons face. Je me réjouis que notre Parlement ait, lors de notre dernière séance plénière, adopté 2 amendements qui témoignent un soutien massif pour un euro digital ambitieux et qui vont, je l'espère, guider l'équipe de négociation du Parlement dans ces discussions qui battent son plein. À présent que je crois que le secteur a tout à fait compris, après avoir exprimé des réticences, la nécessité absolue du projet, et maintenant qu'il semble désireux de l'accompagner, je crois qu'il est important que nous prenions en compte ou que nous répondions aux objections qui sont formulées sur les modalités techniques et opérationnelles de ce projet. Je voudrais prendre 2 exemples. Le secteur privé estime que la réutilisation le plus possible des infrastructures et standards existants serait la meilleure solution, alors que la Banque centrale européenne semble considérer, elle, qu'il faudrait également construire de nouveaux standards et infrastructures pour garantir l'interopérabilité du système. Pouvez-vous nous dire ce qui, à votre avis, manque aujourd'hui dans ce qui existe et comment nous pourrions optimiser la réutilisation de l'existant pour un euro numérique optimal. J'aimerais aussi vous questionner sur la question de la distribution et la question de la distribution de l'euro numérique par d'éventuels acteurs non européens, par l'intermédiaire de wallets comme Apple Pay ou Google Pay. Et je voulais savoir si vous estimiez pouvoir ou devoir mettre un frein à cette possibilité pour préserver la souveraineté des paiements européens. Je vous remercie.
Merci.
Merci beaucoup pour vos 2 questions et au risque de vous décevoir, je pense qu'en fait, elle rejoint tout à fait le débat un peu philosophique évoqué par le rapporteur Papandreou, et ça me donne une chance d'ailleurs de vous remercier tous, rapporteurs, de l'attention que vous avez portée, de l'implication que vous démontrez dans ce dossier qui est technique, qui est compliqué, mais qui est déterminant. Et je dis que vous rejoignez ce débat parce que j'aurais dû le mentionner en réponse à votre question. Je pense que le travail que nous faisons pour renforcer le rôle international de l'euro, pour consolider nos infrastructures de paiement et pour obtenir une alternative européenne au mode de paiement relève aussi de la réponse que nous façonnons ensemble avec vous aux incertitudes et aux attaques dans un certain nombre de domaines. Donc ces sujets-là sont vraiment profondément liés. Alors, vous me posez des questions techniques sur lesquelles mon très cher collègue Piero Cipollone serait beaucoup plus compétent que moi pour répondre. Mais ce que je sais, c'est que, premièrement, l'infrastructure que nous construirons après que le Parlement européen aura fixé le cadre législatif dans lequel l'euro digital peut fonctionner, cette infrastructure-là sera financée sur fonds publics parce que cela relève de la compétence et de la nécessité publique. De la même manière que nous émettons et nous portons le coût de l'imprimerie, par exemple, des billets, de l'impression des pièces, de la même manière, on doit porter la responsabilité et le financement de l'infrastructure nécessaire à l'utilisation de l'euro digital. Je sais que dans la construction par les techniciens et par les experts de cette infrastructure numérique, tous les efforts sont déployés pour, dès que c'est possible, utiliser les infrastructures existantes. Mais les infrastructures existantes, elles ne sont pas pan-européennes. Et pour certaines, elles n'existent pas. Donc ce que nous disons aujourd'hui, c'est que notre construction utilisera au maximum les infrastructures existantes pour tout simplement réduire le coût général du projet et que cette infrastructure, et là je viens à votre deuxième question, cette infrastructure-là, elle sera disponible pour les acteurs du secteur privé qui veulent aussi faire circuler leurs instruments de paiement. Et ça rejoint votre deuxième question, qui est celle de qui aura accès à ces infrastructures. Là, je pense que ce que vous allez travailler comme projet à cet égard, sera déterminant. Et donc, organiser un gate, une porte d'entrée et des éléments de sécurité permettant de réserver et d'utiliser de manière optimale pour une solution européenne ces infrastructures, je sais pouvoir compter sur vous. Merci.
Thank you. For the Greens, Damian Bösleger.
Thank you. I'll come maybe back to the digital euro in a second, but I want to start with the inflation perception. I was wondering, the real wage development that you show is positive, but it's not very impressive. When you look at the reference date 2021, we have maybe reached the same level again. But I was wondering, in what way do you think after-tax income also affects inflation perception? So if I spend a lot on food and housing, but due to the rising costs of the social systems, just because of an aging population, maybe my own income is reduced, and then the relationship between my after-tax income and the prices could also affect my inflation perception. I was just wondering if you had a thought on that. Then I was just wondering how you assess the overall growth outlook when it comes to, for example, new trade agreements, the provisional application of Mercosur. Do you think there will be an effect? And also, what measures are not being done at the moment by the European Commission to strengthen the internal market next to the capital markets union? So in the way of like easing services and products flow across the union, as we don't really see any proposal there. I was just wondering if you had any idea about what the most important points were. And I come back to the digital euro in my follow-up.
Thank you very much for these two questions. So on the impact of tax on income, we factor that in on the basis of each and every annual budget that is passed by each and every member state, so that we can incorporate as much as possible in our projections. How does that, at the micro level, how does that impact the perception by the citizens is something that we do not measure with enough granularity. So I'm not going to, invent and, I don't think that we have the data and all the information as to what this sort of demographic solidarity that increases the cost of social benefits and as a result is contributed to not only by debt financing but by reduced income as a result of increased taxes. I don't know how that impacts the direct perception. My assumption is that it probably follows the same pattern, which is I look at what I pay, I look at what the prices are, I look at what my tax withholding is, and then I have available a certain income that helps me determine my purchasing power and as a result have a view on inflation. That's what I suppose. But as I said, I don't think we have that level of granularity. On the GDP outlook, so we have done quite a lot of work on that. As you know, there was an IMF study that was often quoted that I think Enrico Letta has picked up in his single market report, which is if we were to essentially the thinking is the following: if we were to remove all the internal barriers that we impose upon ourselves, what would be the reduction of price as a result? And for goods, the IMF found out that it was 40%. For services, 110%. We have done the same exercise because, of course, we feel more confident basing our findings on our own research. And we have found out ourselves that on goods, it's higher than that. It's a little bit north of 60%. And on services, it's a little less, a little under 100%. But what it tells us is that whatever it is, whether it's 40 or 69%, whether it's 110 or 96%, directionally, it's a significant imposition on ourselves. So we are our worst enemies. Some economists, rightly so, have said, well, your findings are interesting, but there are barriers that you will never remove. You will not force, I don't know. I want to use something that is not offensive. A French person required to eat with exactly the same level of appetite a non-French cheese. Okay, then I don't offend anyone. That's good. But that's what they call the sort of the cultural preferences. That I don't think that we can remove, and it is part of the study that we did. It's in there. That will not go.
The Germans will always eat the French cheese, though.
And we'll always drink your beer, so it's okay. Sorry, maybe I shouldn't have said that either. Right. But there's an interesting calculation that the team did as well. They assumed that across the euro area, we could lower the barriers. So having, taken the cultural preference into account, if we remove the barriers to the same level that the Netherlands has reduced it, we would have a significant increase in movement of goods between our member states, and the trade would be increased as a result. And it would actually, for that matter, compensate, and more than compensate, the additional tariffs that have been imposed on us by the United States under the decisions. So there is a huge potential. Our study is, it's not probably 67 or 9%. It's not probably 96%. But there is a significant gap that can be filled. Thank you.
Do you want to follow up?
Oh, yeah.
Yes,
Digital euro.
Very, very quick one. I mean, there's the technical questions. I think we saw large support in this House for the digital euro, but there seems to be still a divergence in philosophy what that actually means. So I was just wondering if you can outline again the need for both the online and the offline version. And then just as a question, what does your personal forecast for your own career look like for the next 5 years? Thank you.
Quick follow-up.
Okay, so the digital euro is one of the elements of the mission that I regard as critically important. And as I said in other places, my baseline is that it will take until the end of my term to deliver and to consolidate the mission. Price stability and financial stability, a solid euro in digital form, both online, offline, wholesale, retail, all of it. And I think it's important because in this digital world towards we're going, we need to have a digital central bank money. Just as you want to have a banknote, I want to have a banknote that is my euro banknote, but I also want to be able to use a euro that is my euro and that is in digital form. If it is, in addition to that, faster, simpler, cheaper, identifiable and usable throughout the whole euro area, both online and offline, then I think we will have delivered a huge service to our economies. And reinforced significantly by the same token, the forming of an alternative payment system that is truly European.
Thank you. For the left, Pasquale Tredico.
Thank you, Chair. Madame Lagarde, I will avoid to ask about, again, digital euro, and you already told us very nicely now what you mean. I will come back on inflation. And as you illustrate correctly, in particular referring to the literature and the empirical evidence, we know that low-income households perceive higher inflation due to food and energy. And you track this with ECB, you track this distributional effect. We would like to know, first of all, how do you track it and what are the consequences of this different perception? Because I would like to add one specific thing, which is what we translate from Italian, the inflation as an excuse. The Italian Central Bank and other central banks started to measure the so-called inflation as an excuse, pretext inflation, if you want, which occur in particular for food, for services, and this has an impact. I know that this impact may have some. As a measure, it's not really the monetary policy which can cope with this pretext inflation, but it's more about fiscal policy which should cope with that. But I think that European Central Bank should start to calculate as well for low income the impact of this pretext inflation as an excuse. I don't know if you ever had this information, for instance, from the Italian Central Bank or from other central bank, which in particular during the last years, started to measure this new form of inflation, which have consequence for low-income household in particular. Thank you.
Thank you for your question, but I'm not sure that I understand exactly. What I can tell you is how we try to measure, but the pretext inflation, I'm not familiar with that, and maybe you will explain, separately to me what it is exactly, or I should ask my Banca d'Italia colleague about the research that they produce. There is this distribution analysis of how inflation is perceived depending on the quartile that households find themselves in. That we know and that we try to analyze. We do that on the basis of our consumer survey, which we have started establishing and publishing as of 2020. So it's not a very old survey, but it's one that is really rooted in very solid assessment and which is on a broad-based number of countries and a very large sample of households. So that's what we use predominantly to analyze and to understand the perception by households of inflation as opposed to the measured inflation. That's the technical tool that we use. And it is a fact, as you rightly said, that there are some components that are particularly to which people are particularly attentive if they repeat the purchases, as we all do for food. And if they repeat purchases for transportation, whether it's public transportation or otherwise, those are the sort of regular purchases that inform, probably more so than rentals, even rentals, the perception that people have of inflation. And that's also the reason why we have core inflation that is also measured, taking out of the measure both food and energy. But you will explain to me the pretext inflation.
Yes, because
Greedflation?
Oh, okay.
Oh, I see. So some people take advantage of inflation to actually increase prices.
And if I may, the Italian Central Bank started to measure it.
Okay.
And this was interesting to me, meaning that it is a phenomenon which occurs, and then the authorities started to capture it. So sorry about that.
But I think they probably are going to have a hard time not measuring it, because Banca d'Italia can measure so many things and so well. But given that we brought inflation back to target, a symmetric 2% medium term, and in some countries, because of the heterogeneity between member states, lower than the 2% target, it's going to be difficult for those eventually, as measured by Banca d'Italia, who use that pretext inflation to actually argue that it is there, because it's under control.
Thank you. For ESN, Mr. Drose.
Thank you, Chair. I will speak in German. Zunächst mal für Sie, Frau Vorsitzende, eine kleine Vorbemerkung. Also Sie stellten ab auf die, so nach Ihrer Wahrnehmung, breite Zustimmung zum digitalen Euro in der Debatte neulich in Straßburg. Also ich war auch bei der Debatte dabei und ich habe durchaus sehr, sehr viel Kritik gehört und sehr kritische Fragen und Anmerkungen. Also mit der breiten Zustimmung, also da haben wir offenbar eine unterschiedliche Wahrnehmung. Frau Präsidentin, schön, dass Sie da sind. Ich freue mich immer, wenn Sie uns Rede und Antwort stehen. Ich komme aus einem Land, was aktuell doch ökonomisch in schwierigem Fahrwasser ist. Also der deutschen Wirtschaft geht es nicht gut. Es ist eben eine kleinteilige mittelständische Wirtschaft. Und da spielt auch Ihre Geldpolitik eine Rolle. Die Frage dazu, wie bewertet denn die EZB, wie bewertet Ihr Haus das Risiko, dass eine länger anhaltende restriktive Geldpolitik die Kreditvergabe an kleine und mittlere Unternehmen strukturell schwächt und dadurch Investitionen sowie Wettbewerbsfähigkeit letzten Endes Europas beeinträchtigt? Der zweite Teil meiner Frage ist, also wenn man sich die Bilanzen ansieht, ich habe jetzt zwar Ihren Chart, diese Charts auch angesehen, aber wenn man die Entwicklung von Unternehmen sich in Europa anschaut, viele europäische Unternehmen verlieren im globalen Wettbewerb, insbesondere gegenüber asiatischen Mitbewerbern oder Wettbewerbern, zunehmend an Dynamik. Das ist ein Zustand, der uns, glaube ich, beunruhigen sollte. Hat die EZB eigentlich mal analysiert, wie weit ihre expansive Geldpolitik, expansive Bilanzpolitik zu Zombifizierung beiträgt, Marktpreise verzerrt und ineffiziente Unternehmen am Leben hält? Und wie begegnen Sie der Kritik, dass damit private Investitionsentscheidungen zunehmend durch Zentralbankinterventionen ersetzt werden? Vielen Dank.
Thank you very much for your questions. There are many questions, actually. First of all, don't get me wrong. I was not characterizing the debate that took place on the digital euro. I just looked at the votes, because this is something that my team has brought back to me, and that's what really matters at the end of the day, doesn't it? And on the German economy, I don't want to, go deeply and down into the changes that we are observing. I think that the president of the Bundesbank, Joachim Nagel, keeps us very regularly informed of developments, and what we have seen in terms of PMI numbers in particular and changes is rather in the positive direction. Although, yes, there has been a period of difficult economic situation as far as Germany is concerned, because of the business model on which its economy had been built for a long period of time, and with very successful results for the country. Our mission at the central bank, our primary mission, my mandate, is to deliver price stability. And I think that whether you're a large corporate or whether you're a small business, you always want to be certain that prices are going to be kept under control, and that the inflation target that we have published, that we are setting, that is an element of importance in the investment decision, in the hiring decision. That's what we can contribute the most and the best. And we are dedicating all our energy on that, delivering price stability. If I'm a small business person and I know that prices are going to raise in the range of 2% because my central bank is keeping its target, then I know exactly how I'm going to organize my business. So on the balance sheet, I'm a bit curious about your question, because we have been steadily reducing the size of our balance sheet. And, compared with the highest point at the time of COVID, when we had to massively support the economy, we have reduced that by 2.5 trillion euros. And the commitment is now at 6.2 and will continue to gradually, predictably reduce as we have determined. So in relation to zombie firms, this is certainly not the experience that we've had. And as I said, the balance sheet is in constant, predictable and gradual reduction. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, Chair. Yes.
Sorry, you don't have a lot of time for a follow-up because you took 2 minutes for your question. So if you want to follow up, then it will be like in 10 seconds or something like that. Yeah, very short.
Ja, der Kollege Böselager fragte vorhin nach, es gibt die Aussage, Vertrauen in die Märkte, Vertrauen in die EZB. Erfüllen Sie Ihr Mandat, Frau Präsidentin?
Who is asking that? Oh. So you're asking me if I'm fulfilling my mandate? Yes, I think so. I really think so. And I think that markets are seeing it, and and I have just no doubt that we will continue collectively. It's a governing council that makes decision under my leadership, but we will continue to be riveted to the mission that we have.
Thank you. Second round of question. 1 minute for the question, 3 minutes for the answer, and I will start with EPP and Mr. Falcone.
Thank you, Chair. Madame Lagarde, I will speak in Italian. Le recenti dichiarazioni sulla continuità del suo incarico alla guida della Banca Centrale Europea rappresentano certamente un elemento di stabilità importante per i mercati e quindi anche per le istituzioni europee. Un chiarimento anche oggi qui al Parlamento europeo potrebbe contribuire a rafforzare questo clima di fiducia istituzionale. Appunto, quello che chiede l'Europa e i mercati è la stabilità, soprattutto davanti a quelle che sono le turbolenze e le incertezze commerciali anche nei confronti e nei rapporti con gli Stati Uniti. L'Unione Europea deve mettere in campo delle azioni concrete, azioni che vanno verso una necessità di rafforzare il sistema produttivo e l'industria europea. Ecco perché, alla luce delle sue considerazioni, chiedevo anche sulla percezione dell'inflazione e sui dati sull'inflazione, ritiene che si possano attuare politiche meno restrittive da parte della BCE anche in ragione dei tassi di interesse? E concludo, ritiene la BCE stia facendo di tutto per rafforzare il sistema europeo produttivo?
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your long question. I think that every institution has to do what it was assigned to do. And our assignment is price stability. Our assignment is, as a result, because there is no price stability without it, financial stability. The central bank is very attentive to that. The SSM has its duties in relation to supervision. And we have to continue to deliver that undeterred, independently, and other authorities have to do their job as well. So I'm not going to comment on industrial policy, for instance. I'm not going to comment on Made in Europe. I know those are topics and subjects that you will be debating, that are of somebody else's competence. My determination is to make sure that in our remit, we deliver on our mission and our objective. And I mentioned earlier on the international role of the euro. To me, this is an important element of the work that we have to continuously do. We have introduced changes recently, and I think that it belongs to that objective of the international role of the euro, so that people anywhere in the world can feel confident that they can trade in euro, that in case of crisis there will be euro available at their central bank. That is the purpose of this repo line that is called Europe, of which we have extended the scope with the securities and the guarantees associated with it, because we are the custodian of Europe, of the euro. But, you know, a man's got to do what a man's got to do, but I don't want to substitute anyone. But we will do our job, I can assure you.
Thank you. For the S&D, Eero Enaluoma.
Thank you, and Madam President. Market integration package is quite high on our political agenda today, and rightly so. We believe we have to set ambition quite high to tackle regulatory fragmentation in all parts of the financial sector. I noticed the recent comments by ECB economists on the need for centralized supervision of big asset managers. However, I was also a little bit surprised from the reaction of the business sector when the European Fund and Asset Managers Association said quite rapidly that ECB needs to better understand the ABCs of the asset management. So I would be interested to hear your viewpoints. Is there need for more centralized supervision of big asset management sector, and if so, how could we do it?
Thank you very much for your question on the value of integration and the value of supervision at a European level. We have seen the Commission's package on EU market integration and the efficient supervision that was delivered on December 4th. We support it, and we believe that in relation to all the areas that have been identified by the Commission, that supervision should be more efficient. Supervision should not be fragmented. Some supervision of sometimes very large asset management funds should not be left to the remit of one jurisdiction or the other because of some forum shopping determination. So we do support the supervision at a much more centralized level, which does not mean that it excludes all the other supervisors, but we need to have sufficient harmonization of that supervision so that there is one interpretation, not 27 different interpretations.
Thank you. For Renew, Anouk van Broek.
Yes, thank you. And good morning, Madame Lagarde. Europe's financial system is highly interconnected with the United States and in certain critical areas structurally dependent upon it. In the current geopolitical context, it would be prudent not to assume that such interdependencies will never be subject to political or strategic leverage. And could you therefore elaborate on the concrete measures the ECB is taking to enhance the resilience of our financial system in the face of potential geopolitical tensions or disruptions? And where do you assess the most pressing structural vulnerabilities lie today? Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for your question. And there is no doubt in anybody's mind that a financial market as large and deep and innovative as the US market plays a role around the world. It's not specifically with Europe, but around the world. There is a geopolitical context that is what we know, which is changing regularly, where the level of uncertainty tends to increase and where there is quite a high degree of unpredictability. So what we have to do, and this is a determination from the Governing Council, this is also a determination by the supervisory authorities, for which I'm not going to speak because they have their own job, but it's pretty obvious that we want to stick to the international framework within which financial institutions operate. And Basel III comes to mind, and the speed at which it is implemented, the eventual delay that is observed, all of that is decided at the European level and then discussed at length in the Financial Stability Board. Those discussions are ongoing, but I remain convinced that we have to strengthen and maintain the resilience of the banking sector. I remind you that our banking sector is solid. If you look at the core equity tier 1, for instance, we are a little over 16%. If you look at the various ratios that are important, in particular the liquidity ratios, we are a little north of 150%. So we have a financial sector in the banking area which is solid. There are other financial sectors. We call them the NBFI. It used to be called the shadow banking, but it's now the NBFI. You have lots of animals in that NBFI. You have the insurance companies, you have the private credit, you have the equity funds, you have a lot of things. There are institutions in charge of those in those domains. EIOPA is one that comes to mind concerning insurances. One thing I'm certain, though, is that we need as much transparency and as much reliable data as possible so as to identify the interactions between these various components. NBFI is the topic of the FSB. We are ourselves looking at it as well. The ESRB is looking at it, and we need to be very attentive, given the developments that we've observed. Thank you.
Thank you. For EPP, Ludek Niedermayer.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and it's great to have you here again, Madam President. I share your view that inflation outlook is good, and I would congratulate ECB for doing a good job. But I will look at other part of the equation because the growth is also relevant, not for the economy, but also for the inflation. And here I appreciate your strong, clear comments enforcing importance of the single market development. But there is also the other part of the equation, and this is growth in individual member states. And looking at the data shows that there are big divergences. Some economies are systematically doing well, some are doing very poorly. And it doesn't seem to me that it's cyclical, it should be structure. And also the divisive point is not how rich is the economy, because some rich are doing well and some poor are doing poorly. So I wonder to which extent you think that it's very essential that the member states will also introduce the growth-enhancing reform, and without that there will not be prosperity of EU as such.
Thank you very much, and thank you for acknowledging the success on the inflation front. So on GDP, I agree with you that we cannot regard this heterogeneity between member states as strictly cyclical. There is always an element of cyclicality, but it's not the decisive factor. I think we have to look under the skin of those economies, and some of them have been built over the course of time on business models that are no longer justified by the geopolitical transformations that are taking place, number one. Number two, there is a sectoral component as well. When you look at the contribution of tourism, for instance, on some economies versus others, it's obvious that tourism, transportations, hospitality sectors play a significant part in the success of some countries. One can think of, Spain is an obvious example of that sectorality. There's another component which also matters quite a lot, and that is the energy cost. And you can tell that for those countries where the cost of energy is high by virtue of the grid or by virtue of the sources of energy, then it has an impact on the growth level as well. So I'm not sure that we can transform, equalize, or that it actually is appropriate to do so. What I'm certain of, though, is that this one market that we all hope for will have an impact across the board. And I think we should take all necessary measures and push the actors in charge to go in those directions. Thank you.
Thank you. For the SND, Evelyn Regner.
Whoops.
Herzlichen Dank, Frau Präsidentin. Das Jahr 2025 war ein extrem erfolgreiches für die europäischen Banken. Die europäischen Bankaktien haben extrem Erfolg gehabt. 2026 scheint sich der Fokus nun auf weiteres Gewinnwachstum und anhaltend hohe Ausschüttungen an Aktionärinnen und Aktionäre zu verlagern. Und daher jetzt vor diesem Hintergrund meine Fragen an Sie. Wie beurteilt die Europäische Zentralbank die Nachhaltigkeit der Rekordentwicklung bei europäischen Banken, insbesondere angesichts der weiterhin hohen Finanzierungskosten für Haushalte und KMUs? Und sieht die EZB Risiken darin, dass dieser starke Fokus auf Margen und hohe Ausschüttungen an Aktionäre die Kreditvergabe und die langfristige Finanzstabilität und damit Preisstabilität beeinträchtigen könnte?
Thank you very much for your question. 2 points. One is banks in Europe play a significant role for the transmission of our monetary policy, and we are very attentive to transmission. It's one of the 3 components that we have in our monetary policy stance. It's inflation outlook, underlying inflation, proper transmission of our monetary policy. So we look at that aspect very carefully. I would say that from a different angle, which is not necessarily my remit directly, but the SSM is very attentive to how risks are assessed, anticipated, provisions made, buffers constituted, and not all banks like it, but there is a constant reminder of the cost associated with operating in a different world and with a green transition that is also in the work as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's move to KGI. And I know there is a request from the floor from Fabio Di Masi. 1 minute for the question and 2 minutes for the answer, okay?
Thank you very much. Ms. Lagarde, first of all, if the wage share took some time to recover, or if real wages took some time to recover, this means conversely that the profit share must have benefited. And we know that tendency that corporations tend to hike prices if they know the others do it as well, but they bring it down more reluctantly. So would you also see some room for fiscal responses, such as taxing excess profits instead of putting too much burden of adjustment on the wage share by using the blunt instrument of the interest rate? And the second question, you know there has been some debate around your salary for the Bank of International Settlements. I don't want to discuss your salary here. I just want to know, would you be willing to publish that additional income in a more transparent way in the future and for the past years? Thanks.
There are many requests for the floor, so I will group the question. Ludovic Todor, for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam President. We had a joke in the socialism that bread is more expensive, but locomotives are cheaper. And so that is the spirit, actually, of the perceived inflation. And usually what we buy more frequently, we are more sensitive to it. But I have a question on a different part of the equation, which is the actual inflation. And there are tendencies where we underestimate or overestimate actual inflation. One is, for example, on the housing costs. Sometimes it is not easy to include relevant parts of the housing costs into the CPI indices. But on the second part, we already talked about the technological revolution. We are buying a lot of We are having a lot of services for free because of zero marginal costs. And also, quality adjustments are extremely hard to measure. We usually have the same price on our phones, but the quality is much higher, so it is not easy to evaluate. So do you look also into the problems of estimating actual inflation?
Thank you. Thank you very much. So on the first part of your questions concerning the wages versus profit, I think we've observed different movements. And if there was, for a period of time, in the initial part of the COVID shock in particular, and the energy price increases, we observed an increase in profits and a compression of wages. And then the movement reversed, so that profits were reduced, squeezed, and wages increased. So there was a loss of wages in the first place, compensated by reduced profit margins for a period of time, and we are now at a point, long time into the process, I agree with you, where wages have caught up with the pre-COVID period. You know, there are member states, fiscal is a prerogative of member states. And some member states, in certain sectors in particular, have decided fiscal withholding and, you know, special and exceptional tax withholding. I can think of a couple of countries that have actually done that, but it's something that is decided by member states in their respective capacity. Now, concerning my compensation, I wouldn't call it remuneration because I'm a board member. I'm not an employee of the BIS. That compensation, I have disclosed it very, very clearly, very transparently in response to a Member of Parliament letter. I have indicated all the terms and conditions and what is to be known about that, and I have no quell doing so. In 2025, in our annual account, we have been more readable. Not that any of those numbers concerning ECB executive board members' compensation was hidden or not disclosed, because all is disclosed in our declaration of interest. You can check my employment contract, the terms and conditions, everything is available. So in 25, as I said in my letter, we had hoped that everything would be more easily combined and readable. The Executive Board suggested it. The Governing Council has approved it yesterday at its meeting. And in the disclosure of all financial information, it will be a much more readable set of data. Now, compensation for all board members of the BIS is not paid by the ECB, it's paid by the BIS. But I'm perfectly happy, you know, each and every year telling you how much that is. Oh, and then I don't understand the issue of bread and locomotive, but you will explain to me later on. I'm lost. So, on actual inflation, you know, when we did our strategy review back in 2021, we tried to figure out whether we could insert the actual overall cost of housing. And we asked all the statistical offices and Eurostat in particular, as an aggregator of all of them, to let us have those data. It is not possible. So we try to have as close as possible, but with approximation, of some of the cost of housing borne by the people. But it's not ideal. We don't have it, and we don't give up. We hope that the statistic offices can actually get there. We hope that artificial intelligence, collection of data, analysis of data can help us have a true assessment of all the cost borne by households, but at the moment we don't have it. Now, you asked me also about the impact of technology. Well, that is something that we try to measure as much as we can in terms of expenditure, in terms of investment, in terms of output when it comes to productivity and usage. We do that on the basis of the numbers that we receive, and we do that on the basis of the corporate surveys that we conduct on a very regular basis to ask them whether they are looking at massive investment in AI, for instance, and we try to draw intelligence from that. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Götting.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome again, Madam President. It's great to have you here. It's very instructive and always enlightening that you spend so much time with us every time you are here. First of all, there was a question on the digital euro vote from the question behind. He voted in favor of the Tridico amendments, and he hasn't corrected his votes. So if anyone is contributing to the confusion, it's the AfD party in Germany. Check the roll call votes. It's there. It's very amusing. Secondly, there's one sentence in your opening statement, and it's not about inflation, but it's about the external contribution of the growth, of economic growth. You said it's actually negative. Is that a temporary phenomenon in your? Is that just due to the absolute chaos that is going on at the moment on the other side of the Atlantic? Or are we, I would say, and how does this feed in? And I know you don't want to talk about it, but the buy-European discussion, because if we're so much dependent on domestic demand, what is the role that, for example, international trade and trade treaties can play in helping to support that? Because our future, I believe, is not to have an economy that is totally dependent on public expenditures. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Pedula.
Thank you, Chair. I'll speak in Italian. Presidente Lagarde, io ho molto rispetto del suo lavoro, ho molto rispetto del suo lavoro, del lavoro della BCE, e per questo penso che sia un lavoro che vada oltre la stabilità finanziaria, il Tier 1 e il contenimento dell'inflazione. Guardiamo allora alcuni dati concreti. Il 2025 è stato ricordato in un precedente intervento, è stato un anno eccezionale come quelli precedenti per le banche, per il sistema bancario. In Italia è atteso un aumento degli utili del sistema bancario dell'anno scorso tra il 10 e il 13%. A fronte di questo gli impieghi bancari sono stati positivi più 0,8%. Tra il 10 e il 13 utili, 0,8 impieghi. Gli impieghi nelle microimprese sono negativi, sono diminuiti. Allora le chiedo, anche come SM, avete in mente di attivare un'operazione di moral suasion, un'iniziativa sul sistema bancario perché torni a fare quello che deve fare, erogare credito alle imprese, perché stiamo assistendo a una grande difficoltà? Possiamo parlare di unione degli investimenti, ma se non diamo credito alle imprese, riattivare l'economia sarà impossibile. Grazie Presidente.
Irene Tinagli, for the SND.
Sorry, very quickly, I was solicited by the raising up the issue of housing. Recently, Bowman from the Federal Reserve, the Vice President, said that they are considering measures to lower requirements to make it easier for banks to loan and hold mortgages. This is justified as a way to make it easier for people to own homes, but also, most importantly, to bring back loans and mortgages in the banking sector rather than in non-banks, because they've seen a drop in these. And now, I don't know if this is really the way we want to monitor things, to lower capital requirements or to loosen the regulation. So I don't want you to comment too much on what Bowman said, but I would like you to tell us how is the situation in Europe, how do you see that, and if you are seeing in the debate, internal debate, pressures to follow this kind of measures in Europe as well, and how do you see that? Thanks.
That's a lot of great questions, actually. Mr. Gotling, on your question of, you asked me about the point that I made, which is not actually in my written introductory remarks, but I think that it is such a significant change that I wanted to mention it. Our growth at the moment is decisively produced by domestic factors, investment, consumption. But investment is not just from the public sector. We have, when you look at in the details numbers, you have quite a lot of investment coming from the private sector as well. Those are the two big drivers. The external factors is, I think that from memory, and don't quote me, we'll double check on that, but I think it reduces by 50 basis points, 0.5, our growth. So it's not a completely trivial element, and it's clearly a testimony to the geopolitical changes, to the fragmentation of markets, to the uncertainty about trades, to all sorts of components that are out there. And is it for the long run? Is it a temporary factor? I think we should just be prepared that it is for the long run, and as a result, we should deepen our internal market and make sure that we eliminate as much of the barriers that we impose on ourselves. And if external relationships, because trade in goods and services improves, because we have more certainty, increases, that will be an add-on. But I think that's the approach that is reasonable risk management. That's how I would put it. So I don't want to drop anything. So on banks lending, what we try to do, and this is obviously partly ex post and partly projection. We have two studies. One is our bank lending survey, which we conduct on a quarterly basis, and the other one is a SAFE, which is also a survey about households and non-financial corporates' demand for lending. So we try to cross the supply of banks on the one hand, the demand of borrowers on the other hand. And what we are seeing at the moment is that banks are lending a little more. It grows at a sort of pace of about 2 point something % on a regular basis. And on the safe side, we are not receiving from those that we survey any complaints that they would not have access to lending. We are receiving feedback concerning the types of guarantees or the types of securities that is being asked, but not in a very obvious way. So for the moment, we see that the meeting of the supply and demand in terms of bank lending as being reasonable and slightly increasing, not a lot, but slightly increasing. And we are very attentive to that because we know that it's part of the monetary policy transmission. So we look at that very carefully. We have this thermometer out there constantly on the pulse of the banking sector and the banking services customers. On the issue of the housing sector, I've lived the global financial crisis. I know how much the housing sector was, way before 2007, at the origin of a meltdown that we don't want to see again. So I think that we have to be particularly attentive to the standards, to the requirements, to the criteria, to the ratios concerning the housing sector. Because just as the construction sector is generally a trigger for future growth, I think the housing sector can be a strong indicator of things that have to be under control. Thank you.
Thank you. No more requests for the floor? No? So you have a couple of minutes to conclude if you want. No, it's okay? No. Well, thank you so much.
I want to thank you all. I'm really happy when I come here before you and we can have those discussions and those debates. And I hope you enjoy it at least a little bit as much as I enjoy it. And will continue to enjoy it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being with us today, for answering to all of our questions. Thank you. It's a pleasure for us also. Thank you so much. The vote will be in 30 minutes, okay? So if you have time to have a coffee or discuss inflation.